بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين. Have you always wanted to study the Quran but are not sure where to start? Do you feel that the Arabic language is a barrier that is stopping you from building a close relationship with the Quran? Are you trying to memorize the Quran but are struggling with remembering what you have memorized? Or maybe you would love to memorize it at some point in the future, but as a more realistic goal for now, you would like to just be more familiar with the verses. This Quran reflection series is made to help you build a relationship with the Quran, even if you do not speak Arabic. The goal is to make the verses of the Quran more familiar through both understanding and memorization. Understanding is achieved by going over the English translation, learning the meanings of some of the Arabic words through the word roots, and I'll explain that in a minute, inshallah, and explaining some of the lessons learned from the verses. And whether Quranic memorization is one of your goals or not, these videos also help you have some memory of the verses and the pages, which strengthen your relation with the Quran. We will try to build a visual memory of each quarter, or ruba of a Hizb, and I'll explain that in a moment, and learn some of the unique words, as well as some of the similarities mentioned in each quarter. In the description of each video, there will also be a summary of these unique and similar verses, inshallah. It is important to note, though, that these lessons are not a tafsir of the Quran. Tafsir would go into much details about the background of each ayah, the reason for revelation, and even the consequences of halal and haram and what is permissible, what is not permissible according to the verses. But these lessons are more about tadabbur, and tadabbur means reflection. So they're about understanding the basic meaning of these verses and sharing some of the thoughts and reflections on how to apply them in our lives. If you are looking for tafsir, there are multiple resources on the internet that you can find, inshallah. So let's first talk about the word root system in Arabic. If you don't speak Arabic, trying to learn every single word in the Quran will be overwhelming. But the good news is that there is this word root system in Arabic that makes your life much easier. So the vast majority of Arabic words are derived from a three-lettered word root. So let's take alama as an example. So alama are the three letters that make up the word root for many words. So for example, the word ilm means knowledge. Alim means the one who knows or a scholar. Alim is one of the names of Allah and means all-knowing. Ya'lamun means they know. Yu'allimuna means they teach. So as you can see, there's one or more letters can be added to this three-lettered word root to change the meaning and give more words that all come back to the word root to know. Let's take another example. There's this word root kataba, means to write. So kataba as a verb means he wrote. Katib is a writer. So remember, alim is the one who has knowledge, so the person who does the verb. And katib is also a writer, someone who does the writing. Kataba, that's a verb, it means he corresponded. Kitab means book, and in the Quran it means scripture. Maktab is an office or a desk. Maktaba is a library. Kitaba is writing. Uktub is an imperative form of this verb. It means write. And aktubu, it means I write. So as you can see, adding one or more letters to the word root kataba and changing some of the vowels gives all of these different meanings. If you learn some of the most repeated word roots in the Quran, this will help you to build up a vocabulary list, or at least will help you be able to guess the meaning of some of the words. And it will make you more familiar with the Quran. Another example here is rasala, and that's the word root that means to send. So rasul is a messenger. Arsala means he sent. Risala is a message. And mursal, that which was sent. Inshallah, in this series, what we are going to try to do is to explain some of the most common word roots in the Quran so that when you see them in different forms, you would be able to understand some of the meanings and guess some of the meanings and make yourself more familiar with the verses. Okay, so now let's talk about the Quranic divisions. So what is a juz, what is a hizb, and what is a ruba'? And because we are going to be explaining one ruba' every video, so it's important to understand these words. The Quran is made up of 30 juz, which means 30 parts. And each juz is made up of 2 hizb. And each hizb is 4 quarters. And so we have 30 juz in the Quran, which means 60 hizb. And this means 240 quarters. So how would we know that this is the beginning of a quarter or the beginning of a hizb or beginning of a juz? So let's take a look at the Quran. So for example, this is the first and second page of the Mus'haf. And of course, that's the beginning of the first juz and the first hizb. But there are no marks or signs anywhere here in these pages. But if we go to page 5 of the Quran, that's the beginning of the second quarter. You will see that you can see the sign here, and you see this mark that says ربع الحزب الأول. ربع الحزب واحد means quarter of hizb 1. So that's the end of the first quarter and the beginning of the second quarter. And on page 7, you see another sign here that says نصف الحزب واحد, half of hizb 1. And then here on page 9, this is ثلاثة أرباع الحزب واحد, 3 quarters of hizb 1. On page 11, that's hizb 2, الحزب الثاني. On page 14, you will see ربع الحزب الثاني, quarter of hizb 2. On page 17, نصف الحزب الثاني, half of hizb 2. On page 19, 3 quarters of hizb 2. And then here on page 22, that's the beginning of the second juz of the Quran. So you will see it says الجزء الثاني الحزب الثالث. So that's the end of 2 hizb, the end of 1 juz. And so that's juz 2 hizb 3. So inshallah, every lesson will be covering 1 quarter of the Quran. So who will benefit from this series? This series is most beneficial for people who can read Arabic and or are trying to memorize the Quran. But even if you cannot read Arabic and you're not trying to memorize the Quran by heart, it can still be very helpful for you, especially if you listen to the Quran and invest enough time listening to the Quran and making yourself more familiar with the verses, because this will walk you through the meanings of each verse and some of the word roots that you hear a lot so that you're more familiar with them. So how do you make the most of these lessons? So the first thing is to have pure intention for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that He would give you tawfiq, inshallah. And the second is to listen to the Quran a lot. You need to spend so much time listening to the Quran as much as you can. Try to play it while you're in your car or cooking. And I highly recommend that you listen to a reciter that reads slowly. For example, Sheikh Mahmoud Khalil al-Husari. The next thing you need to do is to take notes. So it's important to scribble your own notes in your Mus'haf or your English translation of the Mus'haf. Just write what caught your attention or what you understood or what you learned from any of the verses that you came across. So make it a personal journey and try to scribble as much notes as you can. Use highlighters and color coding. In this series, inshallah, I will use certain color codes. So for example, I will use red for unique verses and turquoise for verses that are similar to each other. And use your own color coding in your mushaf and write notes in the margins. Also, you should number the similar verses. This is something that I will be doing in this series. So, for example, if you have a certain beginning of a verse that was repeated 4 times. So, for example, وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا. So you will see that in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا was repeated 4 times. وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقٍ. And so you should mark that this is the first time of 4, this is the second time of 4, and so on. This helps you remember these different verses, especially if you're trying to memorize. Another thing is to make your own vocabulary list. And this does not have to be comprehensive. It doesn't have to have every single word of the Quran, of course. It's just the word roots. So some of the word roots, as I mentioned, are very, very common. You will see kataba, you'll see alama, you'll see khalaqa, you'll see rasala. So these word roots and the derivatives of these word roots are very common in the Quran. And if you make your own vocabulary list, it could be very short, but it's your own, and this will help you learn many of the words that are repeated in the Quran and start to develop your own vocabulary of Arabic. And the last thing is to make dua. So it's important to ask Allah to make this journey easy for you and to teach you from the knowledge in this book.